Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. I'm your host, Lee Hutchison, and I hope you're all well. If you followed us on social media and tuned in the past few weeks, you'll know we've got a GoFundMe campaign going on just now, so be sure to check it out on gofundme.com/the Nerd Party, where you'll get more information about why we're in this situation and what you can do to help. And thank you so much to everyone who's chipped in so far, and if you have a spare buck or two to donate, that would be absolutely incredible. This week I'm joined by award-winning Scottish author Helen McClory for a Filibuster interview. I received a copy from 404 Inc. of her latest book, Mayhem and Death, a collection of flash fictions, short stories, prose poems, and the novella. I was absolutely blown away and I had to reach out to Helen to learn all about her creative process, looking at her other work, Flesh of the Peach, the Goldblum Variations, and On the Edges of Vision. Our interview took place in a Starbucks, so I apologise if any of the background noise distracts from Helen's insights. Thanks again to 404 Inc. and Helen McClory for joining me on this week's episode. There's links in the show notes on where you can find our work, so get clicking after you've done listening. Enjoy the show. Thank you so much for joining me, Helen. I really appreciate it. Huge fan of your book. Got to read that recently. I love talking with creative individuals to find out what inspired them to become the creative talents they are. Actually, you're an author, poems, novellas, short stories, cover so much. What would be sort of your origin for that? What made you decide that this was for you? What books or figures kind of stood out for you?
Well, I started writing really young. I think most people have something creative that they do when they're young, and I just kind of stuck with it. I read a lot as a child because I grew up on the Isle of Skye, and as you might know, the weather's really rubbish there. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time indoors. Always writing these little wee stories, a bit derivative of things like Roald Dahl, probably. Yeah. And then when I was an adolescent, I started writing poems, which are awful. But I kept writing them, and I went to university and did a creative writing programme there, just in my undergraduate, just a little one. That was my first proper taster of it, and it was led by John Burnside, Kathy and Jamie. So it was like exposure to really great stuff. And I thought, I really, really like this. And I didn't have any models in my family of like creative people, but I thought, if you just keep trying at something and at every stage see how you're doing and if you're getting better, basically keeping myself as, the standard. I can only be as good as I can be, but I can keep trying to be better. Yeah. And reading all the time, taking in basically every book that I ever read was something that inspired me. I went to Australia and I did a creative writing master's there. I was lucky enough to do that, and that was absolutely explosive. It just exposed me to so many new writers that I'd never seen. And also thinking about writing in a different way, like the meta-textual elements, looking at controversial fiction and discussing like the nature of obscenity and things like this was like really mind-blowing. So I think that kind of path opened up the permission to do things, and to just keep going and keep trying. And I feel like writing is a natural thing, a way of communicating with the world and with every other writer that I've loved. I could list for days, but Virginia Woolf, Anne Carson, Toni Morrison, Jean Rhys, just on and on and on, of writers who've inspired me, mostly women there, I suppose. And the internet too has been a source of inspiration. All of these short, fragmented flash fiction pieces and poems that you kind of get inundated with if you're on Twitter. These things kind of roll around in my brain, and I just feel like talking back to them.
So then I'm quite curious now that you talked about Australia. You think of, say, like kind of Skye in Scotland, places like that. It's got such a deep history and well-known history around the world of Scottish writers, Scottish poets. Australia doesn't almost seem to have that reputation to perhaps like a kind of layman like myself. What was it about sort of Australia? What's their history that sort of you've seen exposed so many writers and creative people there? What's their history like?
It's slim, yes, but it was writers really that weren't necessarily Australian that I got exposed to, but a few minor ones and the people in my class. Yeah. But it was coming at the kind of Western canon from a different angle, from a peripheral angle, which allowed me to see the constraints of tradition. That was really so exciting about it. And the program was so well run as well. It was that kind of aspect, like just looking at what you've come from with foreign eyes, and that has stayed with me all through my life. I've wanted to be in a new place, to learn how to see that place and also where I come from.
Yeah. Do you think with things like perhaps the UK that we're so focused on our talent, and we're so kind of, it's like sort of being almost, the same, you go to school and probably the books that kids are reading now are the same ones that we read 10 years ago and the 10 years ago beyond that, and everyone seems to focus on Shakespeare's and such. Like, do you think there's a limited pool here?
I think it's not that it's a limited pool, like we do have this tradition, but I think we forget that writers can be alive too, like they are here and now, and I would like to see more of that in the classroom. Contemporary living writers, people who aren't necessarily easy or easily digestible for teenagers and for adults as well. I would love to see that.
So do you think like outreach could be a big thing, sort of going into schools, talking with people almost? You read these books and the writers, you can perhaps relate to some of the things they're talking about, but not as individuals. They've lived so far long ago. You feel like an individual like yourself, and one of my mates and fellow 404 guy, Chris McClory, he goes into schools as well, and is that something that you could see yourself doing and have done?
I would love to do that. I've never been invited. I'm on the live literature database, but I haven't heard anything from that. I really like that Chris is going in, particularly because I think he can speak to the youth and be a voice that they have themselves but haven't heard reflected back at them, and that's really good. So I like to see writers from all classes and things. I do think it's something that we could do more of.
So what's kind of like your process for sitting down and writing like a book, short story, poem? Where do you kind of pull your inspiration from to sit down and write? We're here in the Starbucks today, the classic environment. When you think, right, I'm going to go perhaps write a poem today, or how do you sort of go around creating something and producing something?
It varies. Recently I've been using a wee notebook to kind of get down my rough ideas, and then going to the computer and typing it out. And I usually type out a draft pretty quickly in about half an hour or so. If it takes longer, that's fine, but I really like the ones that come quickly because I'm impatient. And then the process of editing is where it all comes together and gets a bit better. And I just try and work on something every day. I try and not get too bogged down with the quality of what I'm doing. It's more the actual act of doing it, which is part of my engagement with the world and trying to get better. So many hours that you have to put in. It doesn't matter if you're not making polished things.
I suppose probably like keeping fit, isn't it? So every day you're running a marathon, but you're working those muscles and kind of keeping on top of it. So kind of you write such diverse kind of material, whether it's poems or short stories, flash fiction. Is it quite a different process for each one, or is it sort of a kind of unique thing that sort of ties them together?
Well, when I'm starting to write, I often won't say, okay, I'm going to write a poem, or okay, I'm going to write a flash fiction. I'll just sit down and start writing, and then the form of it will just emerge on the page, and I go, oh, that's what I'm doing. It's a great way of figuring out where I am with things. Although if I've got a longer project, I have to go, all right, I have to go and do this. And sometimes when I'm working on a longer thing like a novel, it's really boring to just do the one speed, so I'll switch and try do something shorter and more reviving.
With editing, for example, when it comes to whether it's a poem or something, a longer piece, what's your kind of editing process? Like, do you like to share it amongst friends, or is there a secret WhatsApp group where you think, right, guys, I need some honest feedback here? Because I find that sometimes the hardest. You can be critical of your own work. You think, oh, I don't know if this is good enough, and then you throw it out to friends and you get some interesting things. How do you kind of go about it?
I don't really have a writing group that I rely on. At least I haven't so far. And with my short stories, I would just occasionally show them to other people when they were done, and just be like, should I include this in my collection? Is it a bit rubbish, or is it okay? And then so minimal in that front. But with the poems that I'm working on now, I've really embarked on a big poetry project, which is kind of scary. I've started to send them to other poets and say, what do you think? Is this a poem? Because I'm so nervous and self-doubting. And I've got a poetry mentor, hopefully, organised through the Scottish Poetry Library. So it's a bit more formal in this way. I think writing groups would be lovely. I just haven't felt... I don't know, I had a great group when I was doing a PhD in creative writing, but since then I've just sort of moved out and been a little hermit.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm coming back to the idea.
Absolutely. So kind of like you've spoken about like sort of travelling. How has that kind of influenced you? Obviously your kind of debut novel Flesh of the Peach sort of talks about that sort of travelling experience. How much of that influenced that first book where you thought, was that something that tied in for you? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Travel is essential. It is a kind of narrative in itself, and I'm really interested in who we become when we travel and how we start to see ourselves and other people, and the compassion that you can learn from observing people, and the way that you can be pushed into difficult situations naturally by travel, the constraints of it, and just the sense details as well that come up with that. I find it very rewarding, and I think it will be a feature of my writing going forward forever.
Was it with like your first kind of book, was it sort of an overwhelming thing to go, right, what I'm actually going to do and focus on that, you know, you've almost got a blank canvas, you can be anything with a debut writer? Was it that sort of, right, this is my experience, something I can write from and kind of know from?
I think with that, I didn't go in with a plan, which was a bad idea, so I rewrote that novel lots and lots of times, trying to find that story. Until I realised I had to be doing this research, I had to latch on to a structure. I would say that this is the worst possible way to go about doing a project. You really should go in with an idea of what you're doing, but I never do. I just wait and see what happens.
Yeah, see what kind of comes from the fingers.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as well that with like, I've posed it to actors before that say when they get like a role, for example, what's it like on that day when they get that phone call, that's you out, like this is your role, you know, you're set for almost the next few years. What's it like releasing a book, and what's it like on day one when you go, my book's in the shop now, and you know, like hitting refresh thinking, is a review coming in, is there feedback? What's it like on day one of releasing a book?
Horrible. It's exactly that, refreshing and trying to see, because every attempt at writing is an attempt to communicate across barriers and to speak, but you never know if anyone's listening. And in this internet age, it's so easy just to doubt yourself and to doubt whether the book has made an impression at all. There's this quote, I forget who said it, but they compared publishing poetry to dropping petals down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. So it's like that, but you're kind of waiting for this echo that's never going to come. So it's tough. You just have to get on with the next project and hope that at the end of your life you'll have this body of work that people will have listened to and got something from, that it will have been meaningful to other people, but you can't really know that.
What's the nicest thing that like Joe Public's ever like sort of tweeted into you, or not even sort of like a review where it's someone that's like, that's their job, it's paid reviews, but like you just like woke up one day, you know, sitting waiting for a cup of tea, and it's like, oh, this nice message I've received.
Someone told me that they took a screenshot or a little photo of the end of one of my stories from my debut collection and read it out to their loved one like every day. Because they thought it was so romantic.
Melting my face.
Yeah, I know. That was like the most moving thing.
So like kind of like that now, you've kind of recently released Mayhem and Death, you know, it's another mix of kind of short stories. But what's sort of been the reaction to that? And you know, is that you're saying sort of this is your style, or this mix of things? What was it like sort of going for it again? Do you always worry with like releasing another book, you think, right, what happens if I used all my good stuff in the first one? Or is there a sort of an anxiety about sort of doing that?
Every step is anxious and everything is full of anxiety, so I just have to try and shove that aside as much as I can and just focus on what, you know, pushing myself. Have I pushed myself? Have I evolved as a writer? have I got something new to say? I hope so, because I'm a slightly different person each time I approach a project. The response has been pretty good so far. Some small reviews here and there. With what I do, because it's sometimes quite experimental, I think that reviewers don't always have the language to understand what I was going for. So that could be a little tricky. But I think overall people are really open to different forms and they will give it a look. One thing I have noticed is that my book tends to be reviewed in Scotland and in the north of England, and outside of that, down south, nothing.
So what do you think that could be?
I don't know, and I'd really like to know why Scottish fiction generally, I think, has a hard time being reviewed in the big national newspapers south of the border. I don't know, I think we have a lot to say. Possibly, I don't want to come across as a bitter person, because I'm just trying to understand it, why voices from the periphery of the UK are not being amplified. Don't know.
I often wonder with even films and material that's made, it almost seems that things have to explode to almost get a kind of attention, that there almost seems to be there's so much probably pulling at people these days to right, we've got to review this, or right, okay, we need, the PR thing, there's people who've got so much time, and it's maybe even I always think it's the lack of perhaps investment in these sorts of areas, the arts and newspapers, that these things are cuts, it's the editors that go, it's the art section, and then you just have one person covering the whole of Scotland or England going this, here's this story, it's going to be printed in 5 different newspapers word for word.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. It's just pressure, and I know people are struggling to get their attention sorted, never mind to have enough funds to actually invest in this kind of thing, which is to the great detriment of us, and readership too.
I often wonder nowadays if it's people were saying a tweet, for example, there's a tweet, the new sort of full page review in the Herald or the Times or something like that you get one person saying I thought this book was fantastic, and then it can that people actually notice that, going, that person I thought has good taste and stuff like that, and I can click there and I've got the link, whereas you're reading sometimes this and it's thrown away perhaps in the tube station or something like that. I'm not too sure. It's definitely an issue, I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think the things that are well known become well known, right?
Yeah.
And you're how does this happen? How do we allow for the weird and the kind of stuff on the edges? Or even to allow that to become cult, how does that happen? I'm interested.
Absolutely. So do you feel kind of now that you're developing a kind of cult starting to follow being reviewed, as you say, north of England, Scotland, do you start to feel you're noticing when you go to the events to publicise your books or feeds and stuff, you think, I recognise that person, that's a fan of my work and stuff, when's the next one coming out, for example?
I do see that a wee bit, mostly online rather than in person, and it's really, really nice. It's it's that communication urge, you've spoken to someone and they've listened, and I'm really, really grateful whenever that happens. I don't think it's the case that I will ever get to a kind of optimal density of fame, and I'm happy with that, or at least I should be happy with that. So I tell myself it's all about the writing.
So I'm curious as well, you were talking about fans, Jeff Goldblum, for example, I remember the first time I saw that pop up on the internet and stuff, he wrote this little book, the Jeff Goldblum Variations. Why Jeff Goldblum? What inspired that? I think we're both probably kids of the 90s. I think that maybe Jurassic Park might answer that, but what inspired that? That's something quite different perhaps for yourself.
It was. It actually happened because I went on the Paper Chain podcast with my friend and fellow author Gillian Best, and for that podcast we had to write something specific to perform and give each other prompts, and her prompt to me was just Jeff Goldblum. So I was like, oh dear, what do I do with this? And I wrote the first little section of microfictions, and I had such fun with it. I said to 404 Inc., who published the first 2 books, what if I just made a pamphlet of this? And they said, well, I'm kind of interested. And I went ahead and I just sat down and for 2 days wrote the Goldblum Variations while listening to the Goldberg Variations. And it just kind of came out, I think, because Jeff Goldblum is one of those celebrities who can contain multitudes. And it was like a little mental health break for me to do it.
So what's your kind of favourite Jeff Goldblum work, where you think when whether he does is obviously his voice work, acting talent. What's some of your favourite Jeff Goldblum like scenes, moments, or films?
Oh, obviously Jurassic Park.
Yeah, of course.
Every scene in Jurassic Park with him in it is fantastic.
I think I saw a screening of it a few months ago, and I remember just like the noise, like obviously that scene where he's topless, it's almost become this meme, and just the response in the cinema was just like, woo! It was like the cameo cinema. You think this is a bit unbecoming.
Yeah, it's a bit exploitative. I also really liked him in Thor Ragnarok.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic in that, and just so quirky, and quirky is a bad word, but you know what I mean, just idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
And just fully allowing the part to be as weird as he wanted.
Yeah.
I love that. Costume design was also great.
Absolutely. A huge Taika Waititi fan, I'm going to assume.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Always a positive sign of this podcast. Like, so what's your favourite Taika Waititi movie then?
Oh, What We Do in the Shadows.
Excellent choice. You look forward to the TV series?
Yes, I am excited to see how that's going to be.
So, like, I'm curious then, like, so obviously, like, we spoke about things that kind of inspire you as a writer. What inspires you, makes you happy and stuff, like when you think, right, I'm going to go see this film or read this book. What's your kind of, cultural diet in a way?
Oh, I watch a lot of horror films because I really love them, and I think you can see that in my fiction as well.
Definitely.
I've got kind of macabre outlook. I love watching weird films from the 70s and going to art galleries and just kind of wandering around and stumbling onto things and going, I don't know what I just saw, and I don't really have the language to speak about visual art because I've never really studied it, but I find it very inspiring, and kind of the images of it kind of leak into my work. Yeah, that's what I really enjoy. So I'm big on the old art and film kind of stuff as well.
It's perfect being here in Edinburgh to get that kind of like, when you've kind of like travelled the world, what does it make you kind of feel when you come home to Scotland to like be with like the kind of culture here again? What, does it compare to anywhere else in the world, or what's some of the kind of places you've gone to you think, I'm really connecting with this culture?
I think Scotland is its own thing, and there are places that are similar, like Ireland's a bit similar. In Australia, there's a little strain of the same kind of cultural touchstones, but I think it is its own place, and part of that is the landscape as well, and the weather, because nowhere else has the weather that we have, which is pretty dire most of the time.
I think we were snowed in last week, and now we're sitting in a Starbucks just dripping the sweat away.
I feel sometimes when I come back to Scotland that I'm a little bit alienated, and I've always been somewhat of an outsider, which is probably why I like travelling and seeing other things. I feel like I connect to maybe something different in every culture that I visit. I'm just recently back from Brazil, and I really enjoyed meeting the people there and their outlook and their kind of warmth. It was a bit comparable to Glaswegians.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very friendly. And very keen on socialising and telling jokes and things like this. But then, of course, you've got the whole other climate there, the actual climate and the political climate, which is really troubling in certain regards. Yeah, I get something fresh from everywhere I go, and I take my Scottishness with me, but I'm always open to the way that other cultures are, and I'm always searching, I think.
When you win something like, say, like, I think, hopefully I've got to try the Saltire Award, when you win something like that, does it almost make you feel like, I'm kind of embodying sort of Scottish culture here, or something like that, or something where they think, they've recognised something I've done in that way? What's it like to win something like that has such a kind of cultural connotation to here?
Well, it was the Saltire First Book Award, so it was definitely an award for emerging, I think. It's like a beginner's award. It made me feel really lucky and very, very surprised, because the book came out first with a tiny American press, so I didn't expect to get anywhere with it, and the fact that it was rewarded, surprised, and also made me think that the Saltire Society were very open to experimental forms and to the work itself, which had come from nothing. Like, I didn't need to get on any hype train to get there. It gave me a lot of respect for the reward, and also a lot of luck in my future career, you know, because of that.
Yeah. Does it feel like a kind of changing of the guard, perhaps, when you were talking about to see some work like yourself so kind of rewarded with something like that, where you think maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it may have been something a bit safer? Do you feel that sort of there's a change happening and that kind of...
I can't really say, because I think the Saltire first book has always rewarded things that are different. It always goes to something, not necessarily the big book of the year or anything like that. It just goes to whoever they are interested in at the moment. So I can't say that I really see a change. I'd love to be able to say that, you know, experimental writers in Scotland are suddenly going to be rewarded with fame and fortune. That would be lovely.
Absolutely.
No.
And kind of finally, what are you kind of working on at the moment, and is there sort of any events that if people are like kind of listening to this or looking to find your books, what kind of events have you got kind of coming up in future projects? Any Jeff Goldblum version 2s coming out?
I can't really speak about that, but there's something in the works there. A hint. I'm working on some poems and I'm working on a novel. It's all in the kind of drafting stages right now. In terms of where people can see me, I'm going to be at the Aberdeen May Festival and at Coastward in Dunbar. And you can check on their websites for my dates, because I can't remember off the top of my head. And my last published book, Mayhem and Death, and the reissue On the Edges of Vision, which won the Saltire First Book Award, have just been published by 404, and they're available in the bookshops now.
Perfect. And if people want to kind of reach out to you and kind of learn about anything that you're up to, or, you know, pass on some praises and tell you about reading stories delivered, where could people like maybe find you on the internet, for example?
Well, I'm on Twitter, and it's just my name, so it's at Helen McClory. I love talking to people on Twitter. I'm there way too often, so if you just even want to recommend I read something, come forward. I'd love
Perfect.
it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It's been such a pleasure to meet such a unique individual, and your work is fantastic. So I wish you all the fame and fortune in the world.
Oh, thank you very much.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.